"Sir, step away from the counter. This gate is closed to you." The words came out, clipped, rehearsed, loud enough for the entire boarding line to hear. At Gate B14 of Charlotte Douglas International, 30-some strangers lifted their heads from their phones to watch a man in a plain gray field jacket being told, in front of all of them, that the seat he had paid for now belonged to somebody else. Before we get to that moment, let's rewind 6 hours, to a city still dark and humming, to a man who had decided a long time ago that he would never raise his voice to prove he belonged in a room. Charlotte woke up at 4:50 a.m. under a sky, the color of wet slate, the kind of pre-dawn gray that makes an airport smell like jet fuel and cold coffee before the first flight even pushes back. A black Suburban idled outside a narrow brick townhouse on Siegel Avenue, engine ticking low, wipers sweeping once every 12 seconds against a drizzle that hadn't decided whether to become real rain. Marcus Whitlock stepped out of that house in a gray field jacket that had cost $310 4 years earlier and had never once announced that fact. He carried a scuffed canvas duffel in his left hand, the strap resewn twice with waxed thread, and in the inside pocket of his jacket, wrapped in a folded handkerchief, a brass railroad watch that no longer kept time. He was 41 years old. He did not look like a man who mattered. That was, in its own quiet way, entirely on purpose. Marcus had founded Cobalt Spine Systems 9 years earlier out of a one-bedroom apartment near UNC Charlotte on a laptop with a taped-together hinge and an idea that sounded almost foolish when he first said it out loud. A single platform that could hold an airline together from underneath, the way a spine holds up a body that nobody ever thanks for standing upright. Crew legality windows, fuel clearance timing, baggage routing integrity, dispatch authorization chains. The parts passengers never saw and never had to see, because when they worked, the entire enormous machine of modern flight simply worked, silently, invisibly, every 6 minutes of every single day. 9 years later, Cobalt Spine ran the hidden skeleton behind 14 major carriers across North America. One of them, the largest client on the books, the one account that alone represented 22% of Cobalt Spine's annual revenue, was Meridian Sky Airlines. Nobody standing near Gate B14 that morning knew any of that. To them, Marcus Whitlock was simply a black man in a plain jacket sitting quietly with a worn duffel bag, waiting like everyone else. He had learned a long time ago not to explain himself to a room before the room had earned that explanation. That lesson did not come from a business school seminar. It came from his father. Isaiah Whitlock spent 29 years working the overnight sleeper cars out of Charlotte's old Southern Crescent line, folding linens, polishing brass fittings, carrying suitcases for men who called him boy and never once bothered to learn his name. Every night for nearly 3 decades, Isaiah put on a spotless porter's uniform, stood a little straighter than the job strictly required, and refused to let a single passenger's contempt decide what he believed he was worth. He carried a brass railroad watch in his vest pocket the entire time, a watch his own father had carried into those same lines before him. Marcus still remembered at 9 years old, watching his father iron that porter's jacket at the kitchen table long after midnight, humming under his breath, never once complaining about the men on the platform who wouldn't meet his eyes. "You don't lower yourself to match them, Marcus," Isaiah used to say. "You let them stand next to what you already are, and you let that be the whole education." Its crystal had cracked in a fall back in 1971 and was never replaced, because Isaiah used to say, "A crack you keep looking at teaches you more than a crack you hide." When he died 6 years ago now, his heart finally giving out after asking too much of itself for too long, he left Marcus 2 things, the watch, and 9 words spoken from a hospital bed in a voice already going soft. "Don't beg them to see you. Make them answer for it." Marcus carried both the watch and the sentence everywhere. He had never once in 6 years used them the way he was about to use them today, at 6:15 a.m. Marcus walked into the Ridgeline Club, Meridian Sky's premier first-class lounge, and folded his jacket over the arm of a leather chair by a rain-streaked window. Beyond the glass, regional jets taxied through the drizzle, their running lights blinking dull red against low cloud. Inside, everything smelled like dark roast espresso and warm pastry and quiet, comfortable money. Lorraine Ashby moved between the tables, with a silver carafe and a smile she had spent 26 years perfecting. A smile that could switch on and off like a light fixture, depending entirely on who happened to be standing in front of her. She was 51, sharp-eyed, and privately proud of one particular talent. She liked to say she could tell, within 3 seconds of someone walking through the door, whether they truly belonged in a room like this one. She refilled the cup of a silver-haired man in a navy blazer before he had even fully raised his hand. "Right away, Mr. Pemberton." She laughed warmly at something a couple, in matching cashmere, said about the croissant selection, and personally carried a warm plate to their table. Then her eyes passed over Marcus Whitlock, the way a security guard's eyes pass over a door that's already been checked and cleared as a nuisance, not a threat. No greeting, no coffee, no plate. Marcus noticed. He had spent 41 years noticing. He did not flinch, and he did not clear his throat to get her attention. He opened the tablet resting on his knee instead, and on the screen, clean blue lines of live operational data scrolled past. Gate assignments, crew duty clocks, fuel approvals for 9 different Meridian Sky aircraft, currently on the ground between Charlotte, Chicago, and Denver. Data that, if it stopped moving for even 5 minutes, would begin to ground a fleet. To Lorraine Ashby, he was simply a man sitting too quietly in a room she had already decided he did not belong in. A young barista behind the espresso counter, 22, new to the job, watched the whole thing happen without a word. Her name was Kayla Munn, and she had noticed the tablet on his knee. The way the numbers scrolled too fast and too clean to belong to a man just checking flight status, the way his hands never once reached for his phone to complain. She almost said something. She got as far as lifting a small white cup from the rack, filling it halfway, and then Lorraine's voice cut across the room. "Kayla, table 6 needs their check." And the cup went back down, untouched, unoffered. Kayla told herself she would bring it over in a minute. The minute never came. She would remember that cup for a long time. Keep that brass watch in mind. It is going to matter again before this story is finished, and when it does, you will understand exactly why Marcus Whitlock never once took it out of his jacket that entire terrible day. At 7:38 a.m., the overhead speaker chimed. "Meridian Sky Flight 1180 to Chicago O'Hare. First-class passengers may now proceed to Gate B14. Marcus closed the tablet, buttoned his jacket, and lifted the duffel. Lorraine watched him go with something closer to relief than apology, as if a small inconvenience had simply chosen, of its own accord, to remove itself from her morning. She had no idea the man she had just erased was the reason her airline's computers had power at all. Gate B14 had the particular chill of a place where people are sorted before they are ever truly seen. Marcus walked toward the priority lane, with his boarding pass glowing on his phone. Ahead of him, a well-dressed older couple chatted easily with the gate agent, a woman named Denise Colton, 54, ash-blonde hair pulled into a twist, so tight it looked almost painful, reading glasses hanging from a beaded chain around her neck. "Mr. and Mrs. Ferris, Chicago again? Lovely." Denise scanned their passes, smiled, waved them down the jet bridge like old friends. Then Marcus stepped up. The smile disappeared, not slowly, but all at once, like a door swinging shut. "Boarding pass, sir." Her voice stayed polished and official, the exact tone that could be denied later if anyone ever accused her of anything. She scanned his phone. The machine beeped green. Her eyes flicked to her monitor, back to him, back to the screen. Her fingers began tapping, unhurried, deliberate. A line built up behind him. Someone sighed. A suitcase wheel squeaked against the tile floor. There appears to be an issue with your seat assignment. Denise leaned closer to her monitor, performing concern for an audience that hadn't asked for the show. We had an aircraft configuration change this morning. Marcus's face did not move, but somewhere behind his ribs, something clicked into focus. The particular stillness of a man who has just heard a lie built badly. Cobalt Spine tracked every configuration change across the Meridian Sky fleet in real time, down to the catering pallet weight. A flagship transcontinental aircraft did not silently swap configurations without 7 separate system alerts firing across 3 departments. None had fired. Not one. "What's the new assignment?" he asked, low and even. Denise tapped twice, unnecessarily theatrical about it. "Economy Plus, seat 28C. Middle." The word landed in the space between them like a dropped plate. Behind him, a man in a rumpled travel fleece muttered, "Come on, just seat the guy," and immediately looked away, unwilling to spend 1 ounce more of courage than that. "You released my confirmed first-class seat," Marcus said. "Not a question, sir. I'm only telling you what the system shows me." "No," Marcus said it quietly, and something in that 2-letter word made the entire line go still. "You're telling me what you've already decided I should accept." Color rose fast in Denise's cheeks. Not shame, but something closer to insult, the particular fury of a woman who had never once, in 20 years at that counter, been challenged by someone she had already filed away as beneath her notice. That was when Brent Hargrove stepped out from the jet bridge doorway. 47, square-jawed, the kind of senior flight attendant whose posture alone had earned him 2 promotions. He looked first at Denise, then at Marcus, and his conclusion arrived in under 2 seconds. Too fast to be anything but a reflex he'd been rehearsing for years. "Problem here. This passenger is refusing his reassignment," Denise said, eyes still fixed on Marcus. Brent's smile did not reach his eyes. "Sir, we've got a schedule to keep. Take the seat you've been assigned, and customer relations can sort out compensation once you land." "This isn't about compensation." Brent's smile tightened into something meaner. "It usually is." That sentence hit harder than 5 minutes of shouting could have. Marcus felt the whole architecture of it settle over him at once. Not this gate, not this airline, but the deeper machinery underneath it. The one where a man could pay in full, arrive 90 minutes early, follow every rule printed on his ticket, and still be treated like an exception that needed to be corrected back down to size. A phone lifted somewhere behind him in the line, not to help, only to record the delay. The way people film a minor inconvenience for a story to tell later. Marcus closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. He thought of his father's 9 words. He thought of a hospital room, a slowing heartbeat, a watch with a cracked crystal, already sitting in his coat pocket that very morning, as it had been sitting there every single morning for 6 years. "Fine," he said. "I'll take 28C. Denise exhaled, almost smiling now, as if she'd won something. Brent stepped aside with a small nod of professional satisfaction. Marcus walked down the jet bridge without raising his voice, without looking back, without giving either of them the scene they had clearly been hoping for. Denise turned to the next passenger, her smile already rebuilt from scratch. "Good morning. Boarding pass, please." She believed the moment was over. It was not. 3 minutes later, as Marcus stood near the jet bridge doorway waiting for the line to thin, the gate intercom crackled to life, and Denise's voice went out over the entire waiting area, calm and clipped and utterly unnecessary. "Would passenger Whitlock please confirm his seat change at the podium before boarding?" "Passenger Whitlock, to the podium, please." 40 heads turned. A child in a stroller pointed. A man in a Panthers cap laughed once, short and ugly, before catching himself. Head. Marcus walked back to the podium a second time, and this time, Denise slid a printed reassignment slip across the counter with 2 fingers, the way a person slides something they don't want to touch for very long. "Just so there's no confusion later," she said, loud enough for the row behind him to hear it too. It was not procedure. It was theater, and everyone standing there understood exactly which role Marcus had just been cast in. It had only just started, and in about 11 minutes, 1,200 miles away, in a windowless operations center outside Dallas, a night shift analyst named Renata Ford was going to look up from a cold cup of coffee and watch a single amber line crawl across a wall-size screen. And nothing about Meridian Sky Airlines was ever going to run quite the same way again. Seat 28C was not a seat. It was a message, and Marcus understood every word of it before he'd even found row 28. It sat him between a college freshman with one earbud dangling loose and a broad-shouldered man who had already claimed both armrests and had no intention of surrendering either. The overhead bins slammed shut above his head. Somewhere near the tail, a baby cried and was quietly hushed. The cabin smelled like wet coats and reheated coffee, and 38 people's patience running thin. Up front, past the curtain, first class would already be settling into its practiced silence. Sparkling water into real glass, warm towels laid across small trays. Seat 2A, his seat, the one he had confirmed 5 weeks earlier, would now belong to someone who had not paid 1 cent more for it than Marcus had. His knees touched the seat back in front of him. His duffel barely fit beneath it. He fastened his seatbelt, and the click sounded to him unusually final. The woman on the aisle, 68 years old, silver hair pinned neatly back, a paperback open on her lap, glanced over. "Rough morning?" she asked, gentle, unhurried. Marcus met her eyes, half a second longer than the question required. "Something like that." "I'm sorry," she said 2 words. Plain and human. They almost reached him. Almost before he could answer, Brent Hargrove walked the aisle, pausing beside row 28 with the particular smugness of a man checking on a problem he believed he had already solved. "All settled now, sir." The word "sir" arrived wrapped in triumph, the way a man says "thank you" when he actually means the opposite. "I'm seated," Marcus said, even unreadable. "Good. We appreciate your cooperation." Cooperation, as if dignity had ever once been offered to him as a choice. Brent moved on. The old woman's mouth tightened, but she said nothing, and Marcus understood exactly why. He had watched that particular silence his entire life. The silence of decent people who see something happen and calculate, in half a second, exactly how much it might cost them to say so out loud. The aircraft pushed back from the gate at 8:14 a.m. Marcus looked down at his own hands. They were steady. That surprised even him. Whatever was building in his chest was not rage. Rage was loud, wasteful, easy to dismiss later as an overreaction. This was colder than that, cleaner. It already had a shape. He waited until the seatbelt sign chimed off somewhere over the Blue Ridge foothills, then pulled out his phone and called a man named Malik Osei. Malik answered on the second ring. 36 years old, vice president of engineering at Cobalt Spine, the only person besides Marcus who had ever been trained on what came next. "Marcus, you never called during boarding. Initiate protocol firebreak on the Meridian Sky account. Silence on the line, not confusion. Wait. That's a full network integrity hold," Malik said carefully. "It's never been triggered outside of a drill. It's being triggered now. Are we compromised?" Marcus looked toward the curtain separating him from first class, where faint laughter drifted back. "Not compromised," he said. "Exposed." Malik understood enough not to ask the wrong question twice. Authorization code 4 Whitlock 9, full contractual lock. Ground operations only. No aircraft currently airborne is to be touched. No safety system goes down. This is scheduling, crew legality, fuel clearance, baggage chain, gate assignment, dispatch authorization only. A pause. Keys tapping faint and rapid on the other end. "Confirmed," Malik said, his voice shifting into something surgical. Staging firebreak across all Meridian Sky ground systems. Once executed, Meridian Sky loses right access across the board until you authorize manual release. Marcus closed his eyes for 1 second. He saw Lorraine Ashby's gaze sliding past him like he was furniture. He saw Denise Colton's rehearsed concern and heard Brent Hargrove's voice again. It usually is. Execute, he said. Somewhere behind him, the cabin door had already sealed with a heavy, final thud. Done, Malik whispered. The first warning appeared in Dallas at 8:27 a.m. as a thin amber line crawling across a wall-sized operations display. Nobody panicked yet. Renata Ford, 29, 3 hours into a double shift, set down her cold coffee and leaned toward her monitor, frowning at a fuel clearance queue that had simply silently stopped updating. By 8:52, the amber line had become 9 amber lines. By 9:20, 13 gates across 3 hub airports were holding aircraft on the tarmac because dispatch clearance would not clear. By 10:05, Meridian Sky's chief operations officer had been pulled out of a budget meeting. And by noon, 91 flights sat frozen on runways, from Charlotte to Chicago to Denver. Engines idling, fuel burning for nothing, and an internal estimate already circulating that put the exposure north of $900 million if the hold lasted through the evening bank of departures. Somewhere over Ohio, a flight attendant leaned down to row 28 and, for the first time all flight, said his name aloud, reading it carefully off a printout that had just come down from the cockpit. Mr. Whitlock? The captain would like a word with you, sir, whenever you're able. Yes, sir, Marcus said, and that sir landed differently this time. Earned, not procedural. Up front near the galley, Brent Hargrove heard the name spoken aloud and went very still. For nearly 2 hours he had thought of the man in 28C as a delay, an inconvenience, a problem he had personally, efficiently handled. Now, for the first time, he understood it might have been a warning he had chosen not to read. The aircraft touched down at O'Hare, hard enough to rattle the overhead bins. Nobody clapped. Chicago rolled past the windows in gray strips of wet tarmac and flashing amber lights. Passengers held their phones without speaking. Some were recording now. Some were just staring straight ahead, ashamed in a way that had arrived far too late to matter. The cabin door opened into a silence that did not belong to an ordinary arrival. It was heavier than that. Nobody pushed toward the exit. Even the businessman who always shoved past slower travelers seemed to sense, without being told, that something larger than a tight connection was blocking the aisle. Marcus rose from seat 28C. The old woman stepped back to let him pass, her face drawn tight with embarrassment. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He paused. For what? For not saying anything sooner. He looked at her for a long moment. There was no anger in his eyes, which somehow made it worse for her. "That's what survives," he said quietly. Decent people, noticing too late. Then he moved forward. Near the galley, Brent Hargrove stood with both hands clasped in front of him, all the color gone from his face. "Mr. Whitlock." His voice cracked slightly on the second word. "I think there may have been some kind of misunderstanding." Marcus stopped. The whole forward cabin seemed to lean in without moving. "A misunderstanding requires 2 confused people," Marcus said. "I was never confused. Sir, I was following the information the gate provided." "No," Marcus said, and it wasn't loud. "It didn't need to be. You were following a story you already believed before you ever looked at me." Brent's eyes dropped. He had no answer, because there wasn't one that would have survived being spoken aloud. From the cockpit doorway, Captain Frank Delaney appeared, 59, silver-haired, hat tucked under one arm, wearing the careful expression of a man who had been briefed by corporate lawyers before the parking brake was fully set. "Mr. Whitlock, corporate leadership is waiting on the jet bridge. They're asking to speak with you immediately." Through the open door, Marcus could see them. Dark suits, tight, rehearsed faces, a woman clutching a legal folder against her chest like a shield, a communications officer checking her phone with visibly shaking hands. Consequences, he thought, wear very expensive shoes. The jet bridge was colder than the cabin. Rain streaked the glass panels, blurring the terminal into silver lines. A tall man in a charcoal suit hurried forward, then caught himself before getting too close. Mr. Whitlock, Nathaniel Grant, Chief Operating Officer of Meridian Sky. Marcus kept walking. Grant fell into step beside him, his face carved by 4 hours of disaster. On behalf of the airline, I want to offer our sincere apology for the improper reassignment this morning. Marcus stopped so abruptly that Grant nearly stumbled past him. Improper reassignment. For what? Yes, the seating issue. A printer can be improperly configured, Marcus said. A baggage cart can be improperly routed. A man is not improperly reassigned when your employees look at the color of his skin and decide his paid ticket is negotiable. Grant went still. Behind him, the attorney lowered her eyes to the floor. Marcus's phone buzzed. Malik Osi. Full hold remains active. No safety systems affected. Ground operations still frozen. Board members are requesting release authority directly from Meridian Sky's general counsel. Marcus looked at Grant, then passed him toward the aircraft door, where Brent Hargrove still stood, watching his future quietly disappear. "Do not release," Marcus said, and ended the call. Grant's face collapsed by degrees, like a building losing its foundation floor by floor. "Mr. Whitlock, please. At least let us explain to Walter." Then let's talk to Walter. Walter Kessler, 63 years old, CEO of Meridian Sky Airlines, appeared on the conference screen from a boardroom in Charlotte 20 minutes later. And even through pixels and glass, the fear on his face was unmistakable. This was a man who had weathered union disputes, fuel price shocks, 2 federal investigations, and a merger fight that had made headlines for a year. He knew how to soften blame. He knew how to wait for outrage to get tired and go home. This storm had a name, and it was not going to get tired. "Marcus, I want to say personally that I am deeply sorry." Marcus said nothing. What happened at Gate B14 does not reflect who we are as a company. Marcus finally lifted his eyes to the camera. It reflects exactly who you are when nobody important is supposed to be watching. The room went silent enough to hear rain tapping the glass. Kessler's jaw tightened, but he kept control of his voice. "We are prepared to offer a full refund, significant compensation, lifetime elite status, and a public apology." "You're trying to buy back an embarrassment," Marcus said. "I'm here to discuss accountability." One of the attorneys, Vanessa Cole, mid-40s, precise, visibly exhausted, leaned toward her microphone. "Mr. Whitlock, with respect, this system-wide hold is causing enormous operational harm. Thousands of passengers who had nothing to do with this incident are being affected." Marcus turned to her. "I agree with you completely." That surprised her into silence. "Innocent passengers shouldn't suffer because your company built a culture where dignity depends on how someone looks standing at a counter. Which is exactly why this conversation needs to move quickly." Kessler's voice hardened, cornered now. "What is it you want?" Marcus set a folder on the table. The sound of it landing was small, but everyone in that room heard it as clearly as a verdict. "My team prepared this before I landed. Cobalt Spine Legal has attached the full contractual integrity clause. Malik Osi has attached the system logs. Your own gate scanner records confirm the reassignment. Time-stamped, unaltered, matched against 0 legitimate configuration changes on Flight 1180 this morning." Grant's face tightened further. 3 conditions, Marcus said. "First, Denise Colton and Brent Hargrove are terminated today. Not transferred, not quietly retrained somewhere else in the network. Terminated for discriminatory conduct, abuse of authority, and falsifying an operational record to justify it." The regional vice president in the corner flinched but said nothing. "Second, Walter Kessler issues a public statement within the hour. Not customer experience language, not regret. You will name specifically what happened. Racial bias, abuse of authority, a wrongful downgrade dressed up as a system error. The communications director went pale and stopped typing entirely. Third, Marcus' voice did not rise. Meridian Sky funds an independent passenger dignity and anti-bias program at $45 million over 8 years, named the Isaiah Whitlock Initiative after my father, who spent 29 years serving people who never once bothered to learn his name. Independent oversight. Annual public reporting. Mandatory de-escalation certification for every gate agent, flight attendant, supervisor, and captain in this airline. Renewed every year. Audited by a board Meridian Sky does not control. Kessler stared out from the screen, stunned into stillness. You want to dictate our internal culture? No, Marcus said. Your internal culture is what put me in seat 28C this morning, while a man who called it cooperation smiled at me on his way past. I want outside accountability, because you have already proven you cannot be trusted to provide your own. Vanessa Cole opened her mouth, then closed it again, finding nothing worth saying. Beside her, the regional vice president, a heavy-set man named Curtis Boyle, who had said nothing at all for the better part of an hour, finally cleared his throat. For what it's worth, he said quietly, not quite looking at anyone. I sat in a training 2 years ago where somebody joked that Gate B14 has a reputation. I didn't report it. I should have. Nobody thanked him for saying it. Nobody needed to. It was simply the first true thing spoken in that room that hadn't been dragged out of someone by a folder on the table. Kessler leaned back, and for the first time something in him seemed to genuinely break. You're asking me to humiliate my own company on camera. Marcus stood. No, your company did that at Gate B14 at 7:52 this morning. I'm only asking you to finally tell the truth about it. Outside the glass wall of the conference room, cameras had already begun to gather. Word had crossed the country faster than the flight had. Nathaniel Grant took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes, looking for the first time all day, like a man tired of defending a machine that claimed to serve people while quietly grinding them down. Then he said the first fully honest sentence anyone from Meridian Sky had spoken all day. Walter, he said quietly, we should accept. Kessler looked at him through the screen. Walter, we should accept, Grant repeated, not because we're cornered. Because he's right, and every one of us in this room already knows it. Something shifted in the room, not repaired, not forgiven, but pierced by something true for the first time in 6 hours. Kessler closed his eyes. When he opened them, his voice had dropped an octave. Send the documents. They're already in your inbox, Marcus said. Kessler nodded once, slowly, like a man signing something heavier than paper. Then we sign. He signed because there was no cleaner way out, and every lawyer in that room already knew it. The agreement moved through Meridian Sky's private legal wing, while rain tapped steadily against the glass. Nobody smiled. Nobody shook hands. The attorneys reviewed each clause, then reviewed it again, twice, as if daring themselves to find an exit that didn't exist. Across the country, passengers were still stranded at gates. Parents calming children who couldn't understand why the plane wasn't moving. Pilots sitting in cockpits, with fuel loaded and nowhere cleared to go. Marcus felt every hour of it. Power used correctly, he had learned a long time ago, is never light in the hand. At 4:40 p.m. Central Time, Walter Kessler's statement went live. Not from a junior spokesperson, not from a faceless corporate account. Kessler appeared on camera himself, seated beneath the Meridian Sky logo, looking noticeably older than he had that morning. Earlier today, he said, his voice controlled but visibly strained, our employees wrongfully downgraded Mr. Marcus Whitlock from his paid first-class seat, treating him through the lens of racial bias. They abused their authority. They failed him. They failed our passengers. And they failed the values this company has spent 30 years claiming to represent. The words moved fast. Screens lit up across a dozen terminals. News anchors repeated them within the hour. Passengers who had spent all day furious about delays went quiet, one by one, as they finally understood why the planes had stopped moving at all. In Charlotte, Denise Colton sat in a windowless back office, with her badge already placed on the table in front of her, hands clasped so tightly, her knuckles had gone bloodless white. She kept insisting she had only followed what the system showed her, but the scanner log, pulled directly and cleanly by Cobalt Spine's own audit trail, showed the override entered manually under her own credentials. At 7:54 that morning, 2 minutes after Marcus Whitlock had presented a confirmed boarding pass with no configuration conflict attached to it whatsoever. "I've worked this counter 20 years, she said to the Human Resources Director sitting across from her, her voice rising, cracking at the edges. "You cannot do this to me over one seat." "It was never about one seat, Denise," the director said, not unkindly, which somehow made it land harder. "It's about the log showing us it wasn't the first time your name came up next to a complaint like this. It's the fourth." Denise stared at the printout in front of her. 4 names, 4 dates, 4 almost identical complaints, all quietly closed without action over 3 years, all involving passengers who looked nothing like Mr. and Mrs. Ferris. One of them, dated 14 months earlier, belonged to a Charlotte physician named Dr. Adeze Okafor, who had filed a formal complaint after being told her business class seat had been reassigned for weight and balance, a claim the very same audit trail now proved false. The complaint had been closed in 9 days with a form letter and a $50 travel voucher. Denise's mouth opened, then shut. For the first time that day, she had nothing rehearsed to say. At O'Hare, Brent Hargrove took the call from Human Resources, sitting in a crew room, a paper cup of coffee going cold in front of him. He argued first. Then he tried to blame the gate agent entirely. Then, somewhere in the 3rd minute, his voice finally broke. "I didn't know who he was," he said. The voice on the other end of the line answered him softly, without cruelty, which somehow made it land harder still. That was exactly the problem. Brent sat there a long time after the call ended, staring at nothing, understanding for the first time in his career that the issue had never once been Marcus Whitlock's title. It had been the way Brent chose to treat him before he had any idea what that title even was. Back in the private conference room, Nathaniel Grant approached Marcus with the signed confirmation in hand. "Terminations are complete," he said. "The statement is out. The initiative has been announced publicly under your father's name. Independent oversight begins within 30 days. Marcus studied his face for a long moment. There was no triumph in it. Only exhaustion, and maybe, underneath that, the faint outline of something like honesty finally arriving too late to feel good, but not too late to matter. He called Malik Osi. Malik answered before the first ring had finished. "Ready?" Marcus looked out through the rain-streaked glass at a line of aircraft sitting motionless beneath the low Chicago clouds. "Begin restoration," he said, across every hub. Screens across 3 time zones shifted from red to amber, amber to green. Crew validations cleared. Fuel approvals synchronized. Baggage chains unlocked one by one. Dispatch permissions reopened gate by gate, city by city. Not all at once, but carefully, deliberately, the way you pull something fragile back up from very deep water. By nightfall, Meridian Sky Airlines was flying again. But it was not the same company that had woken up that morning, and it could never quietly go back to pretending it was. 6 months later, a new gate agent at Charlotte Douglas International, 23 years old, freshly certified under a training program now mandatory across the entire airline, stood at Gate B14 and greeted every single passenger in the priority line with exactly the same warmth, in exactly the same voice, regardless of what she thought she already knew about them just by looking. Above her workstation, a small brass plaque had been mounted, easy to miss unless you already knew to look for it. It read simply, "In memory of Isaiah Whitlock, and every traveler who was never given the coffee, the smile, or the seat they had already earned. Denise Colton never worked at an airport counter again." 2 years of union grievances and appeals went nowhere because the audit trail spoke louder than any argument she could make, and the fourth complaint on that printout turned out to belong to a college student who had waited 3 years for anyone to believe her. Denise moved back in with her sister in Gastonia, and, for the first time in 20 years, had nothing to perform for anyone at all. Brent Hargrove, 6 months, and one long, uncomfortable process of accountability later, completed the very de-escalation certification program he had once mocked as unnecessary, sitting in the back row of a classroom filled with employees half his age, finally listening, for the first time, to what dignity actually costs when you fail to offer it freely. He kept the certificate on his refrigerator, not out of pride, but so he would see it every single morning before he left for work. Lorraine Ashby, who had never touched the counter dispute at all, watched the story unfold on the same television screen mounted above the espresso machine in the Ridgeline Club, and something in her chest went cold and small when she recognized the man in the gray field jacket from the file photo on the news. She thought of the coffee she had poured for Mr. Pemberton without being asked, and the coffee she had never once offered the quiet man by the window. Corporate did not terminate her, not officially, but her performance review that quarter cited inconsistent guest engagement standards. And the promotion to regional lounge manager she had spent 4 years angling for went instead to a woman with half her tenure, and, as Lorraine put it once to her sister, apparently a better instinct for who's worth pouring for. She never said that sentence out loud to anyone else. She heard how it sounded the moment it left her mouth. Kayla Munn kept working the espresso counter at the Ridgeline Club, but she kept a small white cup on the shelf under the register from that day forward unused, a reminder she never explained to anyone who asked. 6 months later, when a Cobalt Spine recruiter came through Charlotte, scouting for a customer operations liaison role, a job that paid nearly triple what she made behind that counter, Kayla almost didn't apply. Certain a company like that wouldn't want someone whose only qualification was a coffee she never poured. She got the job anyway. Marcus never mentioned her by name in any statement, any interview, any public accounting of that day, but her file crossed his desk once, and he read it twice and approved it without comment. Marcus Whitlock left O'Hare that evening through a side exit. No speech, no cameras arranged in advance, just a man in a plain jacket carrying his father's old duffel toward a waiting car. A reporter called out from behind the barrier as he passed. "Mr. Whitlock, was it worth it?" He stopped. For a moment, the noise of the terminal seemed to soften around him. He thought of Lorraine Ashby's eyes sliding past him without ever landing. He thought of Denise Colton's rehearsed concern, and Brent Hargrove's practiced smile, and every single person that day who had quietly decided he needed to prove he belonged somewhere he had already paid in full to be. He reached into his jacket pocket, closed his hand once around his father's cracked brass watch, and let it go again. "It will be worth it," he said, "if the next person doesn't have to make this same call." He got into the car, and the door closed softly behind him. Above the terminal, planes rose one after another into the dark, carrying people across the country, across entire lives they would never fully explain to a stranger sitting beside them. And somewhere inside all of that motion sat a warning that no airline, no company, no counter or lounge or boarding line could afford to keep ignoring. Dignity was never an upgrade. It was always simply the price of doing business with human beings. If this story reminded you of someone who was once treated as though they didn't belong, leave a comment below with the words "respect matters." Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that they were never invisible. And if you've ever stood in that exact room yourself, on either side of that counter, tell me in the comments which side it was. I read every single one.